Hello, hello. Welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable. We don't have all the answers, but we're going to have a great conversation about the end times. And we have Derek Gilbert on tonight. I'm really excited about that. Tonight, we are talking about Nephilim, AI, and the end times. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on. We have things such as UFO disclosures again. We have ChatGPT and AI, which is changing the landscape fairly quickly. And other weird things that are happening. So, Derek, we are so glad that you're here to join us and bring us up to speed, man, of what's going on and what kind of you see happening prophetically in the world today. So glad you're here.
It's an honor to be back here. And I got to say, by the way, I appreciate you sending me a copy of your new novel, Regenesis Code. I'm really getting into it.
Thank you.
There's some really good touches there that show that you and your co-author have done some real homework. I mean, just in the opening chapter, even just little things like pointing out the not just the religious, but the ethnic differences between, for example, Persians, Arabs, and Turks, which I didn't learn until my adulthood, and I embarrassed myself by accidentally identifying a Persian as an Arab. He did not care for that very much. Something that we in the West don't take into account. Now I see my TV behind me. I'm supposed to display my book cover. Has switched back over to Roku. Thank you very much, Samsung TV. Anyway,
yes.
Yeah. Anyway, technology is great until it's not.
I know.
But
yeah.
Anyway, I mean, these are things that even when you get into the context of the end times are worth considering, because Islam is a religion with 1.6 billion adherents, and it will, at the current rate of growth and current rate of change in the Christian church, will overtake Christianity as the world's largest religion within 50 years, which is why I wrote the book Bad Moon Rising, trying to analyze it and come up with a plausible scenario in the end times for the role of Islam. I mean, you got 1.6, 1.7 billion adherents to this particular religion. What role can it possibly play in the end times? Because if we don't account for that, then we're kind of missing a really big factor, and how that might be used by the fallen realm. What role will it play in rolling out the end game of the end of the era, the end of the age? So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how you spin that out in the Regenesis Code. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. It is on pre-sale for those who are interested, and I highly encourage you to get it. Coming out August 4th. I'm currently working on the audiobook of it. We're going to have a video trailer for the book, and then, God willing, it's going to become a movie. So that's the basic plan. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, it's the first few chapters, which I won't release any spoilers or anything like that, but you dive right in with action, and that's a good way to hook the reader. And again, having done a little bit of reading on Islam and seeing that touched on, just adds to the reality of the world in which you set the story. And so that's one of those little things that a lot of first-time writers, as I know, for trying to write a fantasy novel and stepping into the world or the genre sort of created by J.R.R. Tolkien is not something to do when you're not really prepared to do it. So
it's a lot of work.
I
have a whole new appreciation for fiction writers. I mean, it's a lot of work. No doubt about it.
I can vouch for the amount of research that Sharon has done in creating the world of the Red Wing saga. Beginning in Victorian England with Jack the Ripper. But no, there are so many things that are happening and by the way, the Mount Hermon connection to Jack the Ripper, which is really interesting.
Really? Wow. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Share
as you
that.
know, well, as you know, the discoverer of the Mount Hermon stone, Sir Charles Warren, who also found the Moabite stone, or the Mesha stela, which tells the Moabite version of the story of King Jehoshaphat going to war against the king of Moab, and the king of Moab slaughtering his son on the wall as a sacrifice to his god Chemosh. That's in this stone that was found by Sir Charles Warren, who in September of 1869 found a stela inside a temple on the summit of Mount Hermon. Now, the best way to describe Mount Hermon for people not familiar with it, it's on the northern border of Israel, between Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. It is, in the ancient world, it would be best described as the Canaanite Mount Olympus.
Mm-hmm.
It's where all the gods would meet to confer under the guidance of the creator god named El, the king of the gods named Baal, who was just Zeus by a different name. And so it was a very important place, and everyone in the ancient world knew it. From Babylon to Athens, everybody knew that Mount Hermon was a really important place. And so Sir Charles Warren finds this stela, and Doug, you're the one who's pulled the first new information off of that stone in more than 100 years. I mean, in 1903, when it was finally unboxed by Charles Clermont Ganneau, a French Orientalist and friend of Charles Warren's, it had gone unopened for 33 years. His name is 33.
That's amazing. That
is. 33.
Yeah.
And he translated it roughly as by order of the Most High and Holy God, those who swore an oath proceed from here.
Yeah. Right.
And as you pointed out, that scholars in the in between, even the respected expert on the Book of Enoch, George W.E. Nicholsburg,
right,
just ignored some words that they couldn't figure out.
Right. Yes.
When you found the word bo, which means bovid or bull,
yeah,
and batayu, which you pointed out was a Hellenized version of the Sumerian logogram for the high god Enlil or Dagon, who was equated to El by other ancient scholars. It just connects that mountain and the worship of this god El to that mountain. And now it was written in archaic Greek, so probably wasn't any older than say the time of Alexander the Great. It may even be not even that old. There are some dates that put it even into the Christian era.
right.
But the point is that Greek speakers, thousands of years after Mount Hermon was the site of this rebellion of the rebellious sons of God in Genesis chapter 6, they still knew the story.
Right.
And found it so important, they pulled a 3-ton slab of limestone up a 9,000-foot mountain so they could leave this memorial stone there, which is now at the British Museum, but not on display, interestingly enough.
I wonder why.
So, yeah. So anyway, when
Yeah.
Sharon found that was connected to Sir Charles Warren, who 19 years later, in 1888, was superintendent of the Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, he was in charge of the investigation of Jack the Ripper.
Wow.
So there is a direct connection between Mount Hermon and the Watchers of Genesis chapter 6 and Jack the Ripper. Now, of course, in her storyline, the stone was actually unboxed in 1870, and something really bad happened. So,
okay.
Yeah, that was
that's cool.
Yeah,
That's
she was able to incorporate that into the plot line. But as I'm sure you've learned for your novel, when you start researching these things, like just the research you had to do for the opening scene and the military tactics and material that was used, equipment. I know from having written my novel, The God Conspiracy, that takes a lot of work. But then if you're trying to do it in a theologically correct setting, that's even more work. So.
Yes, it was. It was a lot of work. But I appreciate that. So, this is really, of course, fun to talk about, because sometimes I think there's a massive disconnect between, say, Genesis chapter 6 and the return of Jesus, right? And yet there's really a huge connection between them. Sometimes people just say, oh, they're totally different stories, but Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so the coming of the Son of Man will be. I mean, there's already a major clue right there. And then we start seeing some of the epithets that were given, the book of Revelation. We're expecting some kind of a big red dragon. Hello. Right. I mean, so there's all these different parallels between what we see at the end and, of course, what we see at the beginning, and these various gods in between. Now I know you've written, you wrote The Return of Saturn. Did I say it right? I hope I said it right.
The second coming of Saturn.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, the second coming of Saturn. And so you pulled together a tremendous amount of research in there. And so if people haven't read that, they might want to check that out. It was a really good read. But so yeah, looking at the Nephilim, I mean, something really funky happened. Let's let's remind people, maybe kind of give them your take on what happened there in Genesis chapter 6 and how you see that might be a recurring theme in the the end times.
It's very timely that we're talking about this, because this weekend, Sharon and I are speaking at a small little weekend conference just east of where we are in the Missouri Ozarks. We'll be at His Call Ministries tomorrow night, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday in Sparta, or just outside Sparta, Missouri, which is a small town between Springfield and Branson. And the Nephilim will basically be the theme of the weekend, which is wonderful, because the couple who are behind His Call Ministries, she's a retired school teacher. He's a retired FBI agent. And they've got a network of mostly charismatic folks. So the first time we spoke there, because of some people that are friends with them who had heard about Sharon and me, I didn't know what to expect, because I was raised in very liturgical church denominations. So, charismatic Christianity is still kind of new to me, even though I can yell amen now with the best of them. But Alec and Jenny Wade put this together some years ago, and they really have built a network of different people from different traditions, I guess, Christian traditions. And I think that's an important thing in these end times. And just the other night, and Sharon and I had already been planning to do this anyway, but Jenny sent a note and asked, are you going to be speaking at all on the Nephilim? Because we'd be really interested about this. It's like, yeah. This is why Sharon and I wrote the book 4 years ago called Veneration, and followed it the year later with a book called Giants, Gods, and Dragons, just because these weird things in the Bible are really important. There are a lot of people who want to skip over those weird things because they don't quite fit with our modern, especially here in America, our Western naturalistic bias. The worldview we have that everything has to be explainable by science, including our theology. And so there are well-meaning Christians who will look at events like the parting of the Red Sea and try to say, well, it's because they were crossing a marsh, the Sea of Reeds instead of the Red Sea. Something like things of that nature. And yet we profess to believe in a creator who spoke the universe into existence and who literally rose from the dead. So why do we expect the rest of the Bible to make more sense than that? So there are specific objections to the supernatural view of Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, which in a nutshell says that supernatural entities called sons of God saw that human females, the daughters of man, were attractive. And so they took wives of any they chose. And there were giants, or Nephilim, on the earth in those days. And also after that, when or whenever the sons of God went into the daughters of man. And went into is a euphemism for had physical relations with. So some of these objections include, well, they're angels, and angels can't do physical things. Yeah, except that there are plenty of other examples in the Bible that, yes, they do. Secondly, and Doug, you know this, having studied the Hebrew language, that phrase, B'nai Ha-Elohim, is a phrase that in Hebrew means exactly what it says. It's translated sons of God, which in English, some skeptics or critics will point to the New Testament usage of that English phrase and say, well, it just means that those who are faithful to God, those who have accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Yeah, that's what it means in English. But the Hebrew phrase always refers to supernatural entities. In fact, the cognate phrase, the similar phrase in related languages like Ugaritic and Eblaite, always means supernatural entities.
Something I discovered is that a son of God is a direct creation of God. Mm-hmm. So Adam was called a son of God, and we can become sons of God through Yeshua, but the angels are in fact the very definition of a son of God, because they are a direct creation of God, spoken by God into existence.
And Jesus makes that point clear, in fact, in Matthew chapter 12, where he's confronted by the Pharisees, who say that it's not Matthew 12. I'm sorry. There's another proof text that's used. It's the one where they say
they can't have the angels. Have children.
Luke 21.
Exactly. Luke
21. They can't marry.
Right. Yeah. Right. The angel in the resurrection. They are like the angels in heaven, neither marrying nor giving in marriage. And of course, there are two takeaways from that. Number one, Jesus is talking about in the resurrection, which was the whole point of that verse, not whether or not angels can procreate. And secondly, the angels in heaven neither marry nor give in marriage because they're eternal beings. They're spirit beings. They don't have to procreate. We in the natural world, we have to procreate in order to continue the species. So anyway, the criticisms of the sons of God view of Genesis 6, meaning what it says, are based on twisting Hebrew to mean something it doesn't mean, ignoring the religious and cultural context in which the Bible was written, the world of the Hebrew prophets, and finally, it just takes the English translation of the Hebrew phrase and tries to apply an English definition to it by ignoring what Genesis chapter 6 actually says. And it also ignores the beliefs of the Jews of the Second Temple period and the early church fathers. I mean, it was the universal belief among the early church.
Yes.
Until the 5th century with Augustine.
Right.
He popularized a belief that had been put forward about 100 years earlier by Julius Africanus in the 4th century. The Sethite view that the sons of God were the righteous sons of Seth, and when they married the evil daughters of Cain, somehow their children were giants.
That man did more to hinder the gospel of the kingdom probably than anybody ever did. He came up with the nonsense that we're already in the kingdom. I mean, so it wasn't just on this issue. Let's get rid of most of the supernatural aspects of the Hebrew scriptures, but we're already in the kingdom, and we're going to totally ignore 99% of what's actually in scripture when it pertains to the second coming of Yeshua, because I think he might have been the first one that really promoted a kingdom now type of theology. And sadly, that still permeates and corrupts many Christian doctrines even to this day.
The world that he was living in was being turned upside down. I mean, if we think things are crazy today, the world of the early 5th century when things were turning over, you had the Goths and the Vandals overrunning big chunks of the Roman Empire. I mean, it wasn't quite as bad, I suppose, as the 8th century when you had the legions of the armies of Islam going forth and conquering almost all of Christendom, but it was still pretty bad. So they were probably looking for some sort of way to justify, going forth with a sword in one hand, Bible in one hand and a sword in the other.
When you said Goths and Vandals, I in my mind I was picturing girls with black lipstick and people spray painting on walls.
Yeah, we kind of have that in many of our cities in America today. Goths and Vandals, just a different kind.
Yeah, exactly.
But until Augustine, it was the early churches. It was like Christianity 101. Yes, the sons of God from Genesis 6 were angels, or Elohim, to be more accurate, and the giants, the Nephilim, were giants. And when they died in the flood of Noah, their spirits became demons. This is basic angelology and demonology. Demons were the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood of Noah, and according to the book of First Enoch, which is not in the Bible, and there are reasons for that, but it's referenced by Jude and Peter, and as we're finding out now, the second part of First Enoch, beginning in chapter 37, the book of parables, was referenced by John the Baptist and Jesus. So maybe we should take it seriously. And in First Enoch, it was pretty clear that the spirits of demons, the spirits of the giants rather, were demons that afflicted the world, and they would continue to do so until the judgment. In a sense, their punishment was to wander the earth, hungry and thirsting, but never able to satisfy themselves, tormenting humanity until this final judgment, Armageddon and what follows. And then they would be finally punished. This wasn't even questioned when you read the writings of the early church theologians up to the time of Augustine. That was very consistent. And since Augustine, we've lost that view. Now, over the last century or so, theologians, Bible scholars, have gone back to the supernatural interpretation of Genesis chapter 6, but that's not what's being taught in our seminaries. So most pastors coming out don't have this worldview. Doug, you are unique in being a pastor teacher who accepts the supernatural view of Genesis chapter 6, and your congregation is blessed for that. because it really helps make sense out of a lot of what else goes on in the Bible. These prohibitions against sacrificing children to Molech. When I wrote The Second Coming of Saturn, and I identify Saturn as Molech, it was a surprise to me to find out, and this again was not a discovery by me. I'm just reading guys who, actually write papers and do the deep, heavy lifting research, that every time you see a prohibition against burning children in the fire, passing them through the fire to Molech as a sacrifice, it's connected to the practices of necromancy and contacting the dead through necromancers and through mediums.
So let's touch on that for a second. Let's go back to Mount Hermon, because this is the part that a lot of people don't get. And you did the research, I did the research, and our minds were blown, right, about all that was happening there. And of course, Sharon did the research as well. But that inscription, so the part that I discovered, which was kind of cool, I wasn't expecting to make this discovery, but the word Batios on that inscription is the secret logogram of the god Enlil. And Bad, B-A-D or B-A-T, it means death or enmity. It's also related. So, and without getting in without geeking out, but it comes from the word Ug. All right. I know it doesn't sound the same, but that's just how it is. So Ug and Bad are related. And so when you take Ug, you put that into Hebrew, you come up with Og. Now, what's crazy is in the Ugaritic text, it talks about a deified god of the dead whose headquarters were at Ashtaroth and Edrei. And that's exactly what it says in the book of Joshua, that King Og of Bashan had his headquarters at Ashtaroth and Edrei. I was like, what in the world? This is crazy. And so this god of the dead, known as the king, how do you say king in Hebrew? Melech.
Melech, right.
Or Molech. Molech might be, it's probably coming from the word boshet. So you take the vowels, you have the O-E, which boshet means shame. Right. And so they put those, they superimpose those vowels on this word so that Molech becomes the god of shame, if you will. But Molech is the king, and the king, or the king of the city, is the god of the dead of the underworld, which is what we also find in Ezekiel chapter 28 when it talks about the king of Tyre. It's not talking about some earthly king. When it talks about the king of the city, his name in what was it, Phoenician, was Melkart or Melech Karat. Karat is an ancient word for city. We even have that in Hebrew. We have that in the Bible.
Shemona, and
Kiryat Shemona, exactly. So it's the same word, just means city. And by city, they mean the underworld, the undercity, so the king of the city is the king of the underworld. So you find this theme all over the place. And as you were pointing out, Enlil, Dagon, they're all the same guy. And that's what's so crazy, is that the scribes knew they were talking about the same deified god of the dead. Right. Yeah.
There
of which
epithets,
Molech was. Yeah.
Well, Molech clearly, what was really fascinating, and we know from the Bible that there's a connection between Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites, and Milcom was just the Ammonite form of Melech, meaning king.
Exactly.
But a scholar went and looked at the names of the Ammonites that have been found on the texts discovered in and around the city of Amman, Jordan, which was Rabbah of the Ammonites back in the time of David. And back in those days, in ancient times, biblical times, almost every name had a theophoric element or a god name attached to it, like Hezekiah or Ezekiel. So being that Milcom was the chief god of the Ammonites, the national deity, this scholar assumed that the majority, or at least the most popular theophoric element or god name among the Ammonites would be Milcom. That's not true. It's Elu or El. So El, the creator god of the Canaanites, who is Dagon or Enlil, is actually Milcom of the Ammonites, who the Hebrews called Molech. And this is how we make that connection there. And every one of these entities, and I also connect them to Kronos of the Greeks, Baal Haman of the Phoenicians, Saturn of the Romans, they all are connected to the netherworld. Even the earliest iteration of this god, called Kumarbi, who was the chief god or the father god of the Hurrians, who occupied northern Mesopotamia, roughly the areas occupied by the Kurds today, northern Syria, northern Iraq. But they extended all the way down into Jerusalem. I mean, Arana, who was the guy that David bought the threshing floor from in Jerusalem. Arana is a Hurrian name that means king or lord. So the Jebusites were probably Hurrians or Horites in the Bible. Anyway, this entity has the same story. He overthrew the sky god to become king of the gods. And in turn, he was overthrown by the storm god, Zeus, Jupiter, Baal, Marduk, Teshub for the Hurrians. Same story, slight differences in the story, but it's the same story in terms of the pattern over and over again. And this entity, Molech, El, Enlil, Dagon, Bod or Batio, winds up connected to the netherworld. Enlil ends up by the time of David and Solomon as a judge in the netherworld. Dagon's chief epithet or nickname is Lord of the Corpse. Saturn and Kronos, of course, we know from Greco-Roman mythology, were banished to Tartarus by the storm god Zeus, Jupiter. The same story with Kumarbi. He was banished to the netherworld by the storm god Teshub. So what's interesting is that Peter tells us in 2 Peter 2, verse 4, that there are angels who sinned, who are in Tartarus. Right. Now, this is the only place in the New Testament where that word Tartarosus is used, which means we should pay attention. Because he used the word specifically, and he used it deliberately under the influence of the Holy Spirit. So who were the angels who sinned? In 2 Peter 2, it's clear from the context that it was a sexual sin. And so that points back to Genesis chapter 6.
Yeah, you've really just got to totally ignore what 2 Peter and Jude are saying to come up with this nonsense that Genesis 6 is about literal men, sons of Adam, sons of Adam, and daughters of men. I mean, you've got to, and what's funny is these teachers, they actually claim to believe in the resurrection. They would claim to believe in the supernatural aspect of Yeshua turning, the fish and multiplying them, and then the parting of the Red Sea and all these supernatural events. But yet on this, they have an issue with it. And like you said, it's ancient. I'm just wondering, why is it such a stumbling block for them to see the supernatural, other dimension of Scripture, and what happens even in Revelation when, for that final period of time, when it's going to get sure enough biblical down in here. I mean, in other words, they're no longer going to be even allowed in the heavens. They're cast down for this 42 months. So I see that as sort of what happened then will happen again. And I believe to the other part of what Doug had put in the title was, and I'm sure that this is like a softball question, do you believe that's part of what's happening right now with the alien disclosures and the it's not even dripping anymore? They're like literally, starting to feed people, to get people set up. And that, coupled with the panspermia theory, that people that actually study this, they now understand that the possibility of life coming from inorganic materials is impossible. It could never have happened. And so, like, even that interview with Ben Stein and Dawkins even went there. Well, yeah, the aliens could have done it. And I think Francis Crick, or one of those guys, were like, he started believing in panspermia back in the 70s. But more and more people are starting to, I've got friends. They were in a text string today, and you got to talk about Bigfoot tonight, Derek, because one of them said he's watching it to talk about Bigfoot. and he's not a believer, but he loves ancient aliens. He loves the Skinwalker Ranch. He loves this supernatural stuff. But I keep telling him, man, all this stuff is, I'm not saying it's all true, but a lot of it's got a lot of truth to it. They're just not little green men.
Well, that's why Josh Peck and I wrote the book back in 2017, The Day the Earth Stands Still, which is a play on that 1952-53 movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, remade with Keanu Reeves. The the week after our book was published in 2017 is when this story broke. Leslie Kean, who's sort of become an official mouthpiece of the military industrial or military intelligence complex, really, that's been pushing this story for the last 5.5 years, put the story out through the New York Times. Now, a journalist, an investigative journalist for the New York Post named Stephen Greenstreet, did a story last March in which he revealed that the guy who was at the heart of the story back in 2017 and became sort of the face of the movement was all over CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Lou Elizondo, who claimed to be the head of a secret government project called AATIP, AATIP. Turned out that he was not, and in fact, that organization never actually existed. Surprise, surprise. There was another organization with another acronym that I can't remember off the top of my head that was funded by the Defense Department. And that's fine. Look, if we've got anomalous things flying over the United States that we don't know about, I would like for our government to investigate because they might be coming from China or Russia. But there is no evidence to this point, despite what this new whistleblower is saying, there is no hard evidence that the craft that he claims have been recovered by secret government projects that are of unearthly origin, non-human origin, he describes. Okay, Tucker Carlson, God bless him, he launched his new Tucker on Twitter show this past week, and it's got something like 1.4 million views already on that 10-minute monologue. He used the disclosure, the official disclosure, and the Ukraine war as examples of why we can't trust corporate media anymore. He's got a point there, but he is saying, look, this should be a huge story. We have now credible evidence that there are extraterrestrial entities, that extraterrestrial life exists. Well, unless he means extraterrestrial in the sense of interdimensional, inhuman entities, yes, as a Christian, I can agree with that. There have been inhuman entities visiting the earth since the beginning of humanity. From the very beginning of our existence on this earth, inhuman entities have been interacting with and interfering with humanity. That's the biblical narrative. That goes back to the Garden of Eden. But I don't think that's what he means, and I don't think that's what these other folks mean. The question I have to ask is, why is the corporate media paying such attention to it now? Why is the military intelligence complex pushing this idea now? And they seem to keep pushing and giving it another jolt every 6 months or so. And why is a respected, intelligent guy like Tucker Carlson so drawn into this? He did a special feature on this on his own, was the Fox, online subscriber deal.
Did Tucker really ever actually flunk out of the CIA or get out of the CIA? I mean, we all know about their operations where they inserted people into the media. So again, who knows? I'm just saying, you've got your Hegelian dialectic, you've got your thesis, you've got your antithesis, you've got Tucker Carlson on one side, and you've got the MSNBC talking parrots on the other side. And I just, and I think they're both, he's driving his train, he's doing what he's paid to do and told to do by his controllers. And you've got MSNBC and CNN, they're programming their version. And so that's where I think that's coming from, in all honesty.
Well, in fact,
is Tucker really a journalist?
Yeah, well, you may be right, because you're right. We know that the media is co-opted. But that's one of the reasons that the last section of our book, Veneration, which deals with the Nephilim, the cult worship that they inspired, veneration of the ancestors. The last section dealt with the UFO phenomenon. And why is it, and this is a question that Josh and I asked back in 2017, why is it that all of this contact, people who claim that they're hearing messages from the Ashtar Command or whatever, are getting messages telepathically? Why is it always telepathic? I mean, if these entities are so technologically advanced that they can cross the vast gulf between the stars, why can't they use a webcam? Why can't they flash lasers at us, Morse code or something? Why can't they use a radio, a two-way, a CB, anything? Why is it always telepathic? And why do the messages contradict one another?
Well,
You get one message from one person who's hearing from the Ashtar Command, this other group that's been hearing from the Nine for a period of like 25 years. There was a CIA asset, a contractor named Dr. Andrea Puharich, who would conduct seances with people that, and it's really a weird group. I mean, the original group back in the early 1950s included some of the wealthiest old money families in the United States, like the Forbes and the Astors and
ding, 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 ding.
yeah.
Well, yeah,
and when you get into the 1970s, this rotating group, this cast of characters included Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek. And so they were hearing these messages from the Nine, who eventually identified themselves as the 9 chief gods of Egypt, or at least the cult that was worshipped at Heliopolis in Egypt. So, why are they giving us one message and the Ashtar Command is giving us another message and the Galactic Brotherhood is giving us another message? And again, why is it all? Well, the reason it's telepathic is because it's spiritual. It's not technological. Yeah. These are not characters that have crossed the distance between here and Alpha Centauri. They've been here the whole time, and they're just using a culturally relevant meme to reveal themselves.
And you bring this out in the Second Coming of Saturn, where you talk about Damien Eschels, who was communicating with Enlil, right? And it was purely a cultic, satanic type of communique that he was getting. It was not technological at all in its in its manifestation.
Yeah, he's a devotee of Aleister Crowley, which is something that William Ramsey did a really good deep dive into that in his book Abomination. And he also did, was it Abomination? I think that was I'd have to go back and check on my shelf back there. The book that he wrote about the West Memphis Three, which Damien Eccles is one of 3 teenagers who were convicted of what appeared to be a ritual type killing of 3 boys, 8-year-old boys, in West Memphis, Arkansas. And they were eventually released on what's called an Alford plea, where they don't admit their guilt, but they admit that the state has enough evidence to convict. Okay. But this was after a campaign from very prominent people in the music industry and in Hollywood, people like Peter Jackson, Johnny Depp, Winona Ryder, went to bat for Damien Eccles and his 2 colleagues. And so now they're out. And Damien Eccles is making a career on the internet, teaching people how to summon angels. And this was apparently a breakthrough for him. He wrote in his book, and I forget the title of the book, but he believed that he found the breakthrough that when he contacted Enlil, he felt like he had the power of 1,000 archangels coursing through his veins. It's like, well, okay, since I believe Enlil is in the abyss, I don't know that he contacted Enlil directly, but I believe that these spirits that are locked up in the abyss in Tartarus, the sons of God from Genesis 6, have minions. And Deuteronomy 32 kind of hints at that the chiefs of the Gibborim are in the midst of Sheol. And
Apollyon or Abaddon, I forget. I'm not good with my ancient pronunciations, but in Revelation, is that when it talks about Abaddon being in the abyss currently, he's going to be let out.
Right.
Is that same entity that you're referring to?
In my opinion, yes. Yes, I think that's Kronos, Saturn as king of the Titans, the group of supernatural beings confined to Tartarus. Peter says that the sinful angels from Genesis 6 are likewise confined in Tartarus. It made sense to me that the angel of the bottomless pit, the king of those in the bottomless pit, would be Saturn, Kronos, Baal-Haman, Enlil, El, Molech, etc., etc., etc. Asher, chief god of the Assyrians, same entity by different names. And he would be then Abaddon or Apollyon in Revelation chapter 9. Now, it's not a theological hill I'll die on because it's not a salvation issue, but I think the puzzle pieces fit.
Yeah, I mean, so Derek and I have a minor difference on this. I think that Enlil is Satan. He thinks that Enlil is a different bad entity.
Shemiyaza.
Yeah,
Shemiyaza.
yeah. I mean, I think we're that close and that far away, But so we're very close in the research that we did. We came to different conclusions on that, and that's all part of the fun. That's all.
Right.
That's all part of how this
and like
works.
I said, I
Yeah.
am more than happy.
No,
as I
sorry,
said
you
earlier,
must agree with me. I have everything correct.
Well,
that's an inside joke right now, Derek.
So, and there's a few questions in the chat. So people are saying, are demons fallen angels? So, I take a little issue with that. I think that fallen angels. So I have a kind of a nuanced version, all right, and I understand a lot of people see it more like Derek sees it, but I think that you had angels that before they fell, they came down to planet Earth. They saw the girls were pretty, and they're like, hey, let's do this different stuff, and then when they created this Nephilim body suit, then that's what they themselves inhabited. All right, that's my take on it. And then when that bodysuit died, that fallen angel that was living in that bodysuit was then banished to live its time out as a demon. But I really don't think there's any difference between demons. I think it's a linguistic issue. So that's my take on it. And I understand I'm slightly in the minority when it comes to this question. But that's all part of the fun. So just for people that are wondering,
what's your view, Derek?
I go with the Enochian view that when the spirits of the giants were destroyed in the flood, they became demons. And in fact, that's similar to the account given by the Greek poet Hesiod, who wrote a lot of what we know about Greek mythology. It was actually Greek religion. That the we call it mythology.
A lot of truth in those myths.
Yeah,
sure.
But when you call it a myth, it sounds like Aesop's fables.
Mm-hmm.
The fox with the sour grapes. It's like, no, this is a little more important than that. The Greeks were actually sacrificing humans to these gods. This is not like Aesop's fables. The poet Hesiod wrote that the men of the Golden Age. Okay, then the term in Hebrew, and this is why I connect this, the term in Hebrew, the term in Greek is moropes anthropoi. And it's also used by Homer of the demigod heroes of the Golden Age when Kronos ruled in heaven. Okay, so when Kronos was still walking the earth, or at least able to, before he was banished to Tartarus by Zeus and the Olympians, that's the fake news version. The real version is when God banished these sinful angels by thrusting them down to Tartarus, according to 2 Peter 2, verse 4. According to Hesiod, the Greek poet, when the men, the moropes anthropoi, the men of this age died, they became daemons, and their spirits wandered the earth, helping humans, and they were kindly and preventing us from harm and stuff like that. So there was a fundamental difference between the way the Greeks saw daemons and the way Jews of the Second Temple period and the early church saw demons. There was nothing redeemable about demons. The Greeks thought, and the Romans thought, and the Phoenicians thought, if you sacrificed to these spirits of these demigods like Heracles, they could do stuff for you. Now, the term moropes, now anthropoi, it's the same Greek term that from which we get like anthropology, the study of humanity. All right, it just means humans basically. But the term moropes, Dr. Omar Anus, who I know you're familiar with, Doug, showed in a paper from 1999 called Were There Greek Rephaim? He showed that term moropes derives from the same Semitic root behind the word Rephaim.
Right.
So the Greeks knew who the Rephaim were, and those are the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. And according to the pagan Greeks, and they got that story from somewhere, the spirits of those men, the demigods, by definition Nephilim, when they died, their spirits became daemons. So anyway, that's kind of the external evidence. It's extra biblical. So again, we can't take that as gospel truth, pardon the pun, but that's why I come down on the side of the spirits of the giants, the Nephilim, who were the children of the hybrid children of the sons of God and the daughters of men, being demons.
Do you believe there's, and this goes to my Bigfoot question too, but do you believe that there's Nephilim, and for Derek first, I guess, that there's currently Nephilim alive that could be in existence now, whether it be a Bigfoot or a Yeti or hiding amongst us, living as humans? I mean, because again, some of these groups that I'm a member of or Facebook people I run into, 99% of people think I'm just for a Fruit Loop on some of this stuff, like secular people and Christians, by the way. You too, by the way. But some of these people make me appear sane. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, as far as a Bigfoot, a Yeti, or any of them that could be hidden away in the Amazon, or do you think that right now everything is just a human being? We're all just humans.
Well,
there are no reptilians. There's no lizard people, or you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and I am open to the idea. I've got friends who I respect as intelligent, productive human beings who firmly believe in things like dogmen. So, and Sharon uses that as, again, acknowledging that the Red Wing saga is fiction, but she incorporates that into the series to explain things like vampires and werewolves. And it is possible that perhaps through direct genetic manipulation, through the method used by the sons of God in Genesis 6, they went into the daughters of men, or through other types of genetic manipulation. I mean, they're getting humans in the modern age to do all sorts of experimenting on human embryos, creating chimeric hybrids. Who knows what might be wandering the earth that we are not fully aware of. I mean, we've had a couple of odd things happen here. We had one, it was really weird because it was a bright sunny morning with, almost no wind. And, Sharon and I are having our morning coffee in our living room, and suddenly we hear a thump on the roof. Now, for the couple of years prior to this event, I will say we had something that we just refer to as the roof walker here at our place. We've lived here for 8 years, and we don't live close enough to trees for anything like a big cat to jump from a tree to land on our roof. Okay, there are no trees close to the house, but it wasn't a quadruped that we heard on the roof either. It was a biped, and it was a biped with some weight, like a human. And Sharon heard it multiple times. I heard it once. I heard a thump on the roof, and then step, 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 like they were running from right over our bedroom towards our garage. One of our house guests also heard it one night, walking back and forth on the roof. Now, we've got some large birds around here, owls, crows, whatever. But again, you can tell the difference between something that weighs, 10 pounds and something that weighs 150, 200 pounds walking around on the roof. This sounded like a roof inspector, for Home Guard or whatever, coming and walking around on the roof. Well, this one morning, that hasn't happened in probably 5 years now. But this one morning, we heard a thump on the roof. And again, it was a calm, sunny morning, no wind. And so I just thought I'd better go look around and see what the heck that was. It was a piece of an airplane that fell and hit the roof. Who knows? Went and looked on our deck. We've got a patio table out there that normally has a patio umbrella screwed into a 20-pound iron base. The umbrella is gone. So I said, Sharon, the patio umbrella is missing. I said, what? The umbrella had been open, but again, remember, it's a calm morning. It wasn't like a gust of wind came and suddenly carried it away. So I went and looked around and found it in the front yard on the opposite side of the house. So somehow, something, because again, no wind, took hold of this thing, screwed into the iron base below the patio table, pulled it out, and threw it across the house, hitting the house on the way over, which was the thump that we heard.
Something may not be happy with you and Sharon living there.
So yeah, what was that? Now, as supernatural things go, that's pretty tame. I've heard stories from people I respect that are much, much more bizarre or ominous or terrifying than that. Because you're right, if that's the worst that the enemy can throw at us, then we're pretty well protected. But
have you ever watched like Skinwalker Ranch or anything like that? As far as this,
watch some of it. Yeah, it seems to me to be over dramatized.
Right.
When you're
Just a
making
little.
TV, you got to, it's like, okay, commercial breaks coming up. We got to leave a cliffhanger. Get people
Got to
come
build
back
up
from
the drama.
Yeah. Again, the people who start digging into the stories at Skinwalker Ranch, they're not really as supernatural as they try to make it out to be for the television series. This secret government program that was supposedly disclosed back in 2017, which actually never existed, but was a nickname that had been given to it by former Senator Harry Reid to cover up the actual program that they were spending money on. And nobody, and apparently didn't want the government to know that most of that money was going to his buddy, Robert Bigelow, who owned Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah, it's, it's not as supernatural as people would like to believe. There may have been some anomalous things there, but it's like any story that once it gets out there in the wild. Like, for example, one of the stories that Josh and I deconstructed in The Day the Earth Stands Still is the idea of an underground base at Dulce, New Mexico. The renowned UFO investigator, Jacques Vallée, who is not a Christian, but he's an honest investigator. And he's one who pointed out that the characteristics of these UFOs, UAPs now, I guess is what the cool kids call them, have more in common with interdimensional beings, like creatures that are phasing into and out of our dimensional reality. So, in other worst, supernatural,
like Stranger Things,
supernatural rather than extraterrestrial. Vallée was talking to Linda Moulton Howe about the Dulce base, and just asked a very simple question: "Who takes out the trash?" And she was like, "What?" And Vallée put this in his book. He said, you're not supposed to ask questions like this because these people really, really want to believe. But the point is, it's become almost accepted canon now in the UFO community that there's an underground base the size of Manhattan under northern New Mexico. Who takes out the trash? Where's the heat signature? That many people working underground in close contact with extraterrestrials, it's believed. There would be a heat signature you could see from even commercial satellites with public access, and it doesn't exist. Where's the water coming from? You need water for something like that. Where's the power? You'd see the power signal. So anyway, when you start digging into it with a little bit of logic and asking some honest questions, the people who want to believe just are, cover their ears, la, 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 la. So yeah, Skinwalker Ranch, to me, and I've not done a deep dive into it, to be perfectly honest, but to me, I think Skinwalker Ranch falls into that category.
So I'm curious, how do you, what do you see the mark of the beast as being? Like, what's it going to look like when it, it's not a barcode. We've moved beyond that. It's not probably not an RFID chip, I'm guessing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it might be something like that, but I think it's going to be tied to a social credit score. And I think it's going to be tied to central bank digital currency. CBDC is what a number, I think more than 50 last time I checked, central banks, including the Federal Reserve Bank, Bank of England, European Central Bank, China's National Bank, the Bank of Japan. They're all investigating how to create their own digital currency, because you look at Bitcoin. I did an interview with Guy Malone, who was responsible for the groundbreaking Ancient of Days Bible UFO conferences 15 years ago in Roswell. Guy is now a copy editor for Bitcoin magazine. And so he's become somewhat of an expert in Bitcoin and other digital currencies. We did a program on whether or not Bitcoin would be the mark of the beast. And he said no, and here's why. Bitcoin is decentralized. The transactions are all reconciled by a loose, independent network of computers that are all working on processing these big numbers that they have to calculate in order to confirm transactions. And that's why Bitcoin transactions aren't instantaneous. you've got to kind of put it out there in the wild. And these computers that are working on the programs, are working on the calculations, have to take it up and calculate it, crunch the numbers, and confirm it. But that also means that no central government can control the currency, because no one company, no one nation has control over Bitcoin, and a number of other digital currencies can make the same claim. But when you get a central bank digital currency, say call it the Fed buck or whatever. Say the Fed buck is issued by the Federal Reserve Bank, and all of our physical cash goes away, and we're all issued, I don't know, debit cards or what have you. Or, hey, here's an idea to make sure that you can never be hacked. Let's implant something in your hand. Okay. The danger with something like that, where it's controlled by a central bank connected to a government, actually, there are a couple of problems. Number one is that you no longer have any financial privacy. Every transaction is tracked. Number two is that the central bank digital currency can be programmed to make it impossible to use that digital currency for unapproved products, services, or vendors.
You've had your meat allotment. We're cutting you off.
Right. Mr. Gilbert, we see your cholesterol level is too high. We're going to have to, you cannot purchase this butter, or you cannot donate to this particular institution because it is teaching a religion that is exclusivist and hateful. So,
and unless people think that this is fanciful, this is already happening in China,
right,
with the social credit system.
Exactly.
It's not implanted into your hand, but everybody has a number, and it's like kind of like the social, like our social security number. It's the same basic idea, and then that you have a credit rating, but this is a credit of your life, not just your financial credit. But did you jaywalk? Well, that's 2 different merit points right there.
Yeah.
Did you forget to visit your mother in the hospital? That's more demerit points, right?
Are you anti-transgender?
Right.
Are you anti the pride alphabet soup nonsense? That's hate.
Well, I don't know I don't know where China stands on some of those questions, but
I'm just talking about where it's coming.
I know, but I'm talking about what is. This is already real. All right, this is already very real in China, and so the point is that if you come out against the government in any way, then they can say, oh, well, you're not being very nice. You don't get to travel, because you're not being a good boy. So,
well, and the one thing, and again, and I know Derek knows this, and I know Doug knows this, and most people probably listening to this channel know this, but the Federal Reserve is not owned by our government. It's owned by private individuals. It always has been. And so these central banks are not owned by Britain or Germany. They're owned by a few powerful families that have controlled and printed the money supply. I mean, Rothschild said it, you give me control of a country's money supply, the ability to print money, loan money to them that I just created out of fiat thin air. And I don't care who the prime minister or the president is. And that was a long time ago. Nothing's changed there. So it's these entities, these people, families that really print the money and run the world. It's not a Federal Reserve. Even that is sort of I guess a misnomer to make most people think that there's actually a government entity behind it as opposed to private individuals. I mean, it's amazing. We're actually letting them print money to loan to America at interest is really what we're doing.
Yeah. And this debt ceiling deal that was reached this past weekend, signed on Saturday by President Biden, both Republicans and Democrats are claiming credit for it, calling it a win. It just kicked the can down the road beyond the 2024 election, so that neither party has to really deal with an uncomfortable subject of the federal deficit. But I think that's part and parcel of this. They say that the federal debt was like $31.7 trillion, and we were kind of bumping up against that legal limit of what the United States government could borrow. But that's less than half of the actual deficit. I mean, if the government was forced to use the accounting procedures used by corporations by law, the actual deficit, when you include the unfunded mandates like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so on, is closer to $80 trillion. So we're in a debt hole. And the only way out of it, I see, unless our elected officials suddenly develop a sense of fiscal responsibility that they have not shown a willingness to do, is a jubilee. There will have to be a major, and I don't think they're going to look at it in the biblical
a great
sense.
reset.
Yeah,
It's got to be a great reset.
I think it'll be the return of Jesus reset. That's
no,
that's
before I'm talking about before
reset. Yeah,
their reset.
Yeah,
I mean, it's they're not hiding it, Doug. I mean,
They're
Klaus,
crashing the economy.
Mr. Kitty Cat, wrote a book on it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, all he needs is a kitty cat.
Well, it's funny
petting
that book, The Great Reset, actually came from a book called The Great Reset, written more than 10 years ago by a guy named Richard Florida. And the idea there was that in order to build a sustainable future, we needed to move everybody into cities. That's part of the World Economic Forum's Great Reset initiative, where we got to move everybody into 15-minute cities, where we're all 15 minutes walk from everything that we need. And the cities would have to be staffed by artistic types. And in his book, Florida makes it clear by the creative types that he sees as the drivers of the future economy. Artists, painters, musicians, transgender folks, and so on. It's like, okay, I'm not quite sure how that ties to the economy, but all right. The problem is that the impetus for the Great Reset, the pandemic, actually showed people that they don't need to live in cities. And when you look at what's happening with our cities like Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, people are getting out of those cities as fast as they possibly can. Now that we all realize, hey, we can work remotely. I don't need to live in a city in order to do my job. The cities are dying. There was a study that was done here just a few months ago on cell phone usage in our downtown areas. San Francisco only has 31% as much cell phone usage from the towers that are downtown as it had prior to the pandemic lockdowns. Chicago is like 50%. New York is like 50%. Los Angeles was the best of the big cities. It's like about 2/3 of the activity downtown is back to where it was. But the point is, people are getting out and they're not coming back, which means they overplayed their hand. If they want us all in these cities, they made a mistake by showing us that we don't need to live in those cities in order to exist. Now, what happens if they crash the internet and we all have to, go back to actually talking to people face to face? Well, that might be what they have to resort to. But we'll see how it plays out. That is the goal, though. They want to drive us back into cities, and this is why I firmly believe that
they would have total control. They would have total control over people then, because you're
exactly.
relying upon food. You're relying upon the government for everything. You couldn't even live. They won't. It's easier to control people when they're in a small confined space versus country.
And that was the fundamental difference between the kingdom of Nimrod, for example, and the way the tribes of Israel lived. They were basically, when they came from Egypt, they were mostly pastoral, although they did take over the cities of the Canaanites that they inherited through the conquest. But they were basically a pastoral people. They were not tied to one place. Every man had his own patch of ground and raised his own flock or herd at his vineyards or whatever. Whereas in the kingdom of Nimrod, the ancient kingdom of Uruk, more than 5,000 years ago, Sumer was occupied at a city-state level where people lived inside the city walls, and the serfs, the peasants, would go out and work in the fields. They'd come back and they'd bring all the stuff to those at the top of the social hierarchy. This is why I firmly believe the slogan for the World Economic Forum's Great Reset shouldn't be build back better. It should be build back Babel, because really that's what they're trying to do. Build back Babel, the kingdom of Nimrod.
Oh, that's nothing new under the sun. What was, is, and will be.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And even the patron deity of Nimrod's home city of Uruk, Inanna, was the first gender fluid entity on Earth. So I mean, it's really true in more ways than one. Inanna,
right.
Ishtar, Astarte.
Yep.
I mean, there are Sumerian hymns that have been found in these clay tablets and translated that praise Inanna for being able to change men into women and women into men.
That's
Return
right.
of the Gods.
Yeah.
Jonathan Cahn wrote a pretty good book on that issue. I mean, and the good news is it's getting some traction. They've been around all this time, but we're just seeing this spirit manifest now.
Right. And we were very happy to see that he took up this topic and wrote about it, because he will reach people that will not pay attention to books from people like Sharon and me, or Doug or L.A. Marzulli or whoever. But Jonathan Cahn has a gift for being able to put it into terms that lay people in the pews will understand and accept. But he's absolutely right. This unholy trinity, Satan, the destroyer, and the destroyer, I was very, very happy to see he reached the same conclusion on the identity of the destroyer as I did in the second coming of Saturn, Molech, and then the enchantress, Ishtar, Astarte, Inanna. Those three seem to have very important roles to play in the book of Revelation. I mean, Satan is depicted as having a kingdom. He's the leader of the rebellion in the book of Revelation.
The dragon. We
believe that the woman in red who's riding the seven-headed dragon, the Antichrist, is Inanna. Mm-hmm. And we believe that the destroyer is Abaddon, Apollyon, who comes out in Revelation 9. So I think they're competing with each other for control. Mm-hmm. They just, like when we're watching, the presidential election right now, beginning to heat up here, the campaign beginning to heat up. We got, 57 Republicans now running for president. And while they all want to get Joe Biden out of the White House, they're going to fight like cats and dogs to be the one to replace him.
That's so true. What's interesting, this could, be a whole show in itself, but when we look at Nimrod, you take his root letters, Mem Resh Dalet, right? So you have Marad, which means to rebel. Those are the same root letters as Marduk, right? It's also the same as the god of the Amorites, which was Martu. For people that speak Spanish, they know that how you say Mars is Martes, right? And, so Mars, Marduk, Nimrod, they're all the same. And this was Ninurta in the ancient world, who was the son of Enlil. I mean, it's really astounding when you start just putting all these things together, Mm-hmm. So, none of us knows until it all happens, right? But we have enough clues that definitely keep us doing our research, keep us doing some speculation, and we're looking. Obviously, the one that we're really looking for is the King. We're looking for Amen. Yeshua. He is in control. None of these things will surprise him, so we don't need to worry about it on the one hand, but we need to keep our eyes open and watch, as he said, make sure you watch. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to watch, and we're trying to just, be cognizant of what's coming. So,
well, by the way, Robert Brecker put out a video today. Rapture's happening during the fall feast this year, 2023. So if y'all know who Robert Brecker is, he gets a lot of views from the pre-trib count, and there's a lot of pre-trib people thinking that this is it. They're going to fly this coming fall. So that's the one thing that's not going to happen is we're not getting raptured this fall.
We'll see. If it happens, I'll be happy, but we're going to keep working until that final minute. What I find interesting, though, is when we start looking back, coming back to the Rephaim and the Nephilim and why these things are important. When you start digging into Scripture, and Doug, again, this, I'm limited by the fact that I don't actually read Hebrew, so I've got to depend on tools in the Logos Bible software, or whatever, Blue Letter Bible, to check my work, because I can't read the original Hebrew. But that the word Rephaim shows up far more often in the Old Testament than our English Bibles let on. And we have to start looking for words like the shades or the departed or the dead to see where the Rephaim show up. And again, the Rephaim, in my view, are the spirits of the Nephilim destroyed in the flood of Noah. So when you take that into consideration, we see that what appears to be just kind of an odd section of the book of Isaiah actually turns out to be a prophecy of the destruction of these spirits. Isaiah chapter 26, beginning at verse 13, O Lord our God, other lords besides you have ruled over us, but your name alone we bring to remembrance, which is significant because in the ancient world around Israel, the pagans they believed that they had to summon their ancestors, the spirits of their ancestors, every month on the 30th of the month to a ritual meal. They had to summon them by name and then feed them with bread and water. That's what the teraphim were for, those little household gods that Jacob's wife stole from his father-in-law Laban. They believed that if you didn't do that, if you didn't summon your ancestors by name, they would cease to exist. So here, Isaiah is saying, your name alone we bring to remembrance. This is sort of a slap in the face at this pagan cult of the dead, or cult of the Rephaim that surrounded ancient Israel. They are dead, they will not live. They are Rephaim, they will not arise. To that end, you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them, which again, in ancient Canaan, being forgotten was a death sentence. You literally, I mean, the end of all things. You ceased to exist. This is why in 2 Samuel 18:18, David's son Absalom erects a pillar for himself in the Valley of the Kings, for he had no son to keep his name in remembrance. That's what that was about. It was this cult of the Rephaim, this cult of the dead that surrounded ancient Israel.
And we can go a step further too, because where did Solomon set up the worship of Molech? Right there in the valley of the son of Hinnom, or Gehenna, right? Geben Hinnom.
The high place on the Mount of Olives.
And there's also the Mount of Corruption, exactly, right there. I mean, and guess where Jesus is coming back? Right there, right? That's where Armageddon's going to be, not up in the north, at least in my opinion.
I agree.
I mean, that is where this epic thing is going to happen. Right. So all of this cult of the dead kind of stuff that was happening at Hermon, but also, of course, in Jerusalem.
Right.
It was all right there. And even it talks about in Isaiah 28 that God is going to do his work, his unusual work, as he did at Mount Perazim and Mount Gilboa, or is that right? The Valley of Gibeon. Right. So, he talks about how, what happened there? He was fighting the Nephilim. He was fighting the Amorites or the Rephaim, right? Different names for the same thing. But, Joshua was fighting against the Amorites, who were big, tall, giant dudes. And their god was Martu, who was Nimrod, right? So, I mean, it's amazing. Oh, there's so much. There's so much. But we are out of time. Oh, bummer. I'm really sorry about that.
No, fascinating stuff.
I know. We had a few more questions. We didn't get to all of them, obviously, but there's more to say for sure. So thank you, Derek. Where can people find you?
The best place is gilberthouse.org. Sharon and I, all of our stuff is there. Our weekly Bible study, links to all of our programs, Unraveling Revelation, my weekly podcast. It's all at gilberthouse.org.
Gilberthouse.org.
And get our app. I know that you got an app as well. We just remind people, get the app, because that bypasses the gatekeepers.
There you go. That's right. Yep. The app is really handy.
Yes.
So, thank you for being on. And, I want to encourage people to get the Second Coming of Saturn. Again, Derek and I come to kind of a fundamental difference in some of our understanding, but we agree on 98% of the findings, and that's what was really exciting about it.
Yeah, and I cite Doug's book in The Second Coming of Saturn, because, and I'm happy to say that your research is truly groundbreaking on that Mount Hermon stone. So
thank you.
Would love to get a chance to actually see that stone in person.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Someday at the British Museum. Yeah,
that was. I went to the British Museum some years ago. I wanted to see an actual Egyptian cubit. Right. And so they had the Egyptian royal cubit, and they let me go in the back room, and I got to touch it. And I was also excited. It was pretty cool. So maybe we just need to go and ask. We just need to go knock on the door and say, I want to see that Steely. So awesome. Well, thanks again. And to everyone out there, thank you for joining us. Have a good night.